There we go. Hello and welcome. This is High Leverage Actions, and today we're going to be talking about boundaries and barriers. My name is Reeve. It's my friend Rory Lemon, and there we go. Hello. Oh, I've done it again. Welcome. It kicks in after I hit play. I don't know how to stop that doing that. Boundaries and barriers. There's one I need to sort out, putting a barrier up for sound. So anyway, we are back for the second episode of the podcast, High Leverage Actions. And so welcome, Rory, again. And thank you for joining me again. This is amazing. I'm looking forward to this whole series. But we were just saying about not making it a comedy approach and respecting boundaries. And I've got more learning to do. So, but anyway, boundaries, I've got to stop that there. Let's get professional. So, do you want to kick us off on the topic tonight, Rory?
Yeah, sure. My name is Rory Lemon, by the way. I'm a neurodiversity and creative flow coach, and 25 years of experience in holistic health modalities, and yeah. And so, coming from a very hypersensitive background of not even knowing how to stop those feelings of, how do we say it? Uh, I call it sympathic. I don't like the word empathic to do with negativity, because to me, empathic is a pure state of compassion
Mm,
and connection
yeah.
and wanting to understand. Doesn't have to be I understand you, but I can want to understand you. That's how empathy extends. That's when it's great. That's what makes humans amazing, is that sense of caring and so. But the thing is, the way I describe I call it sympathic, is because those that are automatically caring will automatically also bring all of their stuff from the past where they've learnt judgments, and that will then it's very, I found it very difficult in the past to switch off the
Mm,
feelings that came from wondering what other people were thinking and feeling about me and how I was showing up. And
yeah.
so that often is the mechanism that then people have to put their boundaries up. So
Mm,
I got quite a controversial opinion about boundaries, that it's all down to the self and not about anyone else in the rawest, deepest sense. I'm not saying that
mm,
other people shouldn't be responsible for their own feelings, thoughts, and actions, and how they show up, and the energy, and all of that. But at the same time, it's a learnable practice to not have. We can get reminded, but we don't have to actually react in such a strong way, which I'm testament of that. So I
mm.
can, I've learned that it's a muscle. It's like a mental muscle. And so I'll just leave it there for now, because I can go on a lot more about that.
Oh,
But
I know
yeah,
you can. I know you can. But that's why we're here to talk about it. And it's great. And I think it is a very confusing topic when we're talking about, if we start with boundaries and then do barriers, because to me, there are two different things. But they are very synonymous with each other. And I get what you're saying about when you don't understand the concept of where to put those boundaries and where to put up barriers, then it's one thing, like you say, to understand and absorb information positive. But I think we absorb, is how I say it, absorb the negativity. And we don't always want to be absorbing it. We want to be repelling some of it for our own protection. But when you think of a boundary in terms of a piece of flat land, for example, a boundary is where one piece of land or one emotional state or set of rules or personal guidelines, a boundary is where one ends and another begins. But the barrier is what you put up on a boundary to stop things from crossing. Now, both the boundary and the barrier have two sides. If you imagine a garden with a boundary, anybody can cross over it, but it's your territory one side and somebody else's the other. But when you put a fence on something, that becomes two things. It becomes a barrier to anybody coming in, but it also becomes a form of protection from you going out or escape, keeping you safe on the inside. And then we put up things like gates to allow selective crossing of the boundary through the barrier with gates and things. When we look at personal development in a similar way, but recognise that it's not as easy as putting a fence around a garden with a gate in it. Personally, it could be that my boundaries, say, for example, talking with Rory, are very different than my boundaries I would have having a conversation with my children or my grandchildren. And in the same state, my personal boundaries around my activities might be very different to Rory's. In things we like to do, Rory's definitely far more adventurous than I am. And that's when that boundary becomes our comfort zone as well. So our comfort zone can also be flexible according to different activities. So there might be something I like doing for me, which is a wide open zone. And Rory would be going, oh no, I wouldn't do that. But for Rory to do something else where he's got wide open zone and I'd be going, no, I'm not. I know for you, it's the cold water swimming. And I'm like, I'm not doing, I'm definitely in the small comfort zone for the cold water stuff. So I think when you're looking at boundaries, it's looking at them individually according to different sets of situations in life, but understanding that the concept is still there. Where does it become a point of end for you and for someone else? And then I think we're then looking at when other people are coming in over that boundary from the other direction, it's about respect, whether or not they respect your boundaries, and also where you uphold those boundaries and say, no, you are not allowed to overstep my boundaries. And that's a form of self-protection and respect. And if you don't uphold your own boundaries, how can you expect somebody else to respect them? So it is a very complex topic. I'm going to give it a break there for a moment, Rory, and hand back to you. But for me, certainly as a trauma response over years and things that I've had happen, boundaries have become a very important thing for me, and especially with raising a family as well, where boundaries are for them, and sometimes to keep them safe and sometimes to help them step outside their boundaries. But again, I'm like you, I think we could go on for ages on this. It's a
Yeah.
very complex but exciting topic.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you for sharing all that. Three things come up for me, which I
Okay.
really liked. One was the first thing you said was um, that each situation
Mm.
has a different set of beliefs that we have around what's challenging and what's not challenging.
Yes.
So when we move into that space, it could be the situation or the individual, the challenge reminds us of something, and then that triggers that can trigger us, uh, as it were, as a word. And in itself, even one thing around that is that that it comes into then what the second point would be for me is to remember about battery charge. Um, when I say battery charge, I mean there's a sense of blood flow and energy flow to particular areas of the brain can also be more towards are we already overloaded with something going on in the background for the day that was already taken our battery charge down in terms of
Mm.
and so if that's not charged back up again then 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 being in that situation is going to be accentuated and we're going to think it's potentially them rather than again something that could be resolvable in the first place if it's preemptible to charge our batteries up ready to go for that situation. If we feel like we have to address that situation and we can't be like if it's more of a case of oh I get to do this then that's okay to work with that. So what's about what charges our batteries? Uh, typically mindfulness practices and also mental rehearsal about potentially the options of being in that situation if it is preemptible, because sometimes situations just come at us, we weren't expecting it. But to bear in mind that when if we feel challenged, that could be because our batteries are low and we haven't been in that relaxation space. The relaxation plus sensory, I wouldn't say the opposite of deprivation, sensory filling ourselves up.
The preparation.
Yeah, being in the senses rather than the thoughts and the challenges takes us away from personalizing anything. So we can be pushing out that personalization and just come back to a sense of being,
Mm.
feeling in safety and relaxation. That will charge our batteries up. So then, therefore, what we may notice is that situation doesn't challenge us as anymore. So our boundary can, like you said, the comfort zone could actually get bigger because we're less triggerable. So so there's that. I'm talking more about the boundary thing. So the final piece on this, which could talk about passing it over to you for barriers,
Yep.
uh, is that what are your yeses and what are your nos? Um, and so setting out in advance, taking some time to process, and that's what coaching can help with a lot, is actually sitting down and taking that time, because life goes on and we forget to do these things. So that's why important to interact with other people, is to set those. What's your yes? What aligns with in that situation, or those typical situations that gives you a full body yes, not just a yes in the mind, but also, it hits you here. It's like, oh yes, that feels good. Oh, those are my yeses. That's why I'm do things. That's what I want. That's why I want to. That's how I want to live. What I want to live by. And then you can filter out the no's that come in. The opportunities to, is it my yes? Is it my North Star of the yes? Is this a no coming in to say no to? And that's where I'll hand it over, because it's getting clear on what you want to do with your life and health, wealth, whatever, love, all those things. What's the no? What are the things you could then say no to if you're clear on your yes?
Yeah. And I think that comes a lot back to the whole point of thoughts and feelings and actions and putting them into a process. Because you think, oh, there is a boundary over there, but that doesn't mean we automatically have to go full charge at it. But then there might be another situation where something happens over on that boundary and that's of high value to you, and you might go full charge in to sort an issue out. And I know, for example, if somebody was to cross boundaries and threaten my family, oh, my inner wolf will come out and be on that boundary with them quicker than you would know. But if I was that boundary meant there's a cliff the other side, I might approach it with more caution. So it's when we're talking about social health barriers and boundaries, and we're talking about financial, physical, social, there's all these different types of boundaries as well. And again, it's just looking at each one, going with obviously what you're thinking, what you're feeling, whether you're getting a good feeling, your heart's aligned, like Rory says, or gut feeling going, well, be cautious here. We have to listen to those feelings and then go back to, like, why am I feeling that? What am I thinking about it? And literally assess every situation. But I think if we're not careful about understanding those boundaries and those barriers, we allow people to trample over them. And that's when other people have no respect for boundaries and we don't uphold our own, that's when we end up like back where Rory says other people will literally walk all over you, literally cross boundaries, and that's when we end up with hurt feelings, hurt emotions, feeling overwhelmed because people are not giving us the space. And it's almost like this energy space that we have around us. And we get some people who walk into a room and it's like they've got this bubble around them. And you can't step into that bubble because that's their safe space. And it's almost like you physically feel that as you approach them, certainly from a point of an empath, and I know Rory will get this as well as an empath, is that some people you just feel like there's a distance that you don't step closer towards them. With somebody else, you might rush up and give them a hug and be glad to stand right next to them and have a conversation. And then somebody else will come in a room who's larger than life. And as they walk in, their energy just encompasses everyone in the room. And this all comes back to this point of thoughts and feelings and just how we approach other people socially. But that's in a social situation. And again, this just applies slightly different. If you're talking about health boundaries, how much you eat and drink is also like a boundary. Pushing yourself beyond the limits, like an all-you-can-eat buffet, drinking to excess and stuff like this. So it changes with every situation, but it's all relevant to how we end up feeling at the end of the day and how we end up going home either happy with what we've done for the day or not happy and what we've allowed other people to do, or how sometimes we have respected other people's boundaries or not. And it is just such a complex topic. And I really think the word respect needs to be brought in here a lot as well, in terms of how we do grow an understanding for this and not only respect our own, but respect other people's as well, because that grows our social ability, and it grows our ability to be empathic towards other people and to understand and help others and to know where to back off from them and give them space. Because, I mean, goodness, I mean, we all know that person where you're like, okay, give me a minute, but they keep going and going and going at you in your ear and they get too close and you're like, you just want to physically back up from these people who don't give you space. And we need to be able to do that for them too. So I'm going off all over the place here and we still haven't gotten to barriers. We'll get there in a minute, Rory. Anything you want to
I thought
round
you
up
were
on
talking about barriers just then.
we kind of are and aren't. I think barriers to me is then more about where we get stuck, because there's a lot of crossing boundaries, which is very free and open, and it is about then saying, okay, enough's enough. There is a point where we don't cross in either direction. Either I'm not going to go and do that, or that person's not going to do that to me. And there's also the whole comfort zone issue. But I think when we're talking about putting up barriers, it's like putting that fence up and saying, right, no more crossing. And that can also be unintentional barriers that prevent us from doing things we want to do, when the thoughts and the feelings are actually preventing us from, I don't know, say like phobias and heights and water and things like that. Like, oh, I want to go swimming, but I'm afraid of the water. And that's when that becomes a barrier rather than a boundary. Like, oh, I haven't got time to go swimming this week because I haven't got the fuel, I haven't got the money in the bank, whatever, and you just haven't got the time. And the boundaries are not quite aligning, sort of thing. But when you've got fears and phobias, they become more of a barrier. And I think barriers just starts to take us in a whole different level. And sometimes, again, we need those barriers. Socially, I know, for example, I've always looked at it for years. Like socially, I'm on like this little island, and that's my bubble. But instead of some people imagine like this bubble around them in a room, I imagine that I'm on this little island. And everybody I interact with, my island floats around. And as I interact with people, there's a bridge to their bubble, their island. And it's an open bridge, it's a boundary, but I can cross it, they can cross it. And I've always kind of visualized it that if somebody pisses me off, like really badly, I put a gate on that bridge and I decide when I can open or close that gate to let them through. But then it gets to a point, if somebody really still pushes their boundaries too far or tries to harm me, then I padlock that gate and I put all sorts of chains on it in my mind. And somebody's got to do something really, really serious before I burn the bridge. And then there's a no-go and a no further options. So I gradually, in stages, kind of put barriers up to prevent somebody else from harming me. And it's just a kind of a strategy I've used over the years to visualize these barriers and boundaries to keep myself safe, because we all know that not everybody out in the world treats us with the respect we deserve. And we sometimes have to do this for a form of protection. And they talk about the circle of influence. And for me, some people just drift off and don't come back, and it's not a problem. But it's putting those barriers up mentally for me that tells me that person's gone too far. And I lose respect for people, and they do things that for me, there's a point of no coming back. And and certainly from a point of being a woman as well, there's very often times when we do have to protect ourselves. And so yeah, there's been a few, not many, but a few where the full works have gone up and things are still not right, and you end up burning bridges, as they say. And sometimes it's essential for peace of mind. And that we've known we've given every opportunity for somebody to respect our boundaries, to show that they can socialize with us without crossing barriers, but they still don't. So anyway, I'm going way into that again. But in my mind, that's how I visualized it for many, many years, these little floating islands and bridges and boundaries. But I'm just trying to think if there's anything else. I mean, we're talking about this in terms of personal and social, but actually our whole culture is built on the concept of boundaries and barriers with law and justice and everything about like school. When we're at work, there's rules, and rules are all about everybody working to the same sets of boundaries and barriers, and it can become the red tape as well. So sometimes those barriers from a cultural point of view can be actually quite a negative thing when we get red tape that stops good things from happening. So that's another one to look at, is when barriers become a problem in themselves. But anyway, I'm going to hand back to you for a minute again, Rory, because we honestly, we're both the same. We could just talk for hours on this, and we're going to try to keep it reasonably short today, but we're not going to win that today.
Well, I'm happy to round it off anyway, really, in a lot of ways, because I feel like it for me it comes back down to some principles. Yes, what you were saying is important to be able to set things in a way in which comes back to safety, because if we don't feel safe,
Mm,
then we will be anxious or stuck. And anxious is means is there's the Greek reference to anxiousness is fixed, stuck. So we're stuck to if there's anxiousness going on, we're stuck to a particular idea, and so to remember that yes, it's really important to put those things up. Um,
mm,
and I feel like to move forwards as humans, there's uh it once that's done, and you know where your no's are, where your yeses are, that's all great. I feel like it's still coming back to the idea that to move forwards, those things will keep reminding us. We'll keep getting reminded it through other people having similar styles of energy, personality types. Or oh, there's the balloons, uh, uh, and and so that's the idea is that to move forwards, once we come back to baseline, and this can be done in the moment,
mm,
to go from, oh, I'm overloaded, what's happening? Oh, I'm assuming. I think the word assumption comes in, like you said about respect, to notice and respect and come away from it all. Also to go, what am I assuming here that's not helping me? Because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter what anyone does. It's what we make it mean about ourselves.
mm,
That's what we take back with us. Like you said, at the end of the day, that's what we take back home with us. So every now and again, I think it's very useful to go through those past experiences and those and to completely let go of them through processing them, through um, being with them, and setting that forgiveness for self and the people that have potentially done whatever could be called disrespect or harm, whatever it is that maybe has happened. It's not to do with letting them off what they did, but it is to know that if we don't do that, then we'll keep getting reminded of it in some way, shape, or form from in going forwards with other things. So if we can burn the bridge from what we're associating with that situation to ourselves and our own emotions, that gives us choice, freedom to move forwards, being reminded of those things, but then not being attached to them any further going forwards.
Like mentally distancing from it. Yeah.
Yeah, and so that so when there's a forgiveness, it's not to say that that act didn't mean something, but it is to say I can let go of that. I can send forgiveness out in order to heal myself, and
Mm.
also and also because no one in their right mind wakes up uh, as a baby and goes, "I'm going to be a terrorist," or you know, or whatever it is that I'm not. You know, that they learn it from somewhere,
Yeah.
and wherever that's learned from
Mm.
was learned from somewhere else, was learned from somewhere else, was learned from somewhere else, and learned from somewhere else.
Yeah.
So, so if you think about if someone is really um has been terrible, whatever you want to call it, uh that sense of them being that was learnt from somewhere.
Yeah.
And, and so if that's coming out of them, even just imagining what it's doing to them inside, even if they're putting up a front of it being,
Mm.
you know, getting something out of it, imagine what their life would be like if they could forgive themselves, for instance. So
Mm.
that forgiveness is not just for here, it's also to let go, to burn that bridge and maybe rebuild a sense of connection to what could have been if they hadn't have learned that or if we hadn't have learned that. And it comes back to that assumption. What can we learn to assume that's better to move forwards in forgiveness?
I know for a lot of people, though, they think it's very hard to offer forgiveness to somebody who's done something really dreadful. And I understand that. Believe me, I do understand there. I've been there. But there is also the point of, for me, and certainly for my children with things they've been through over the years, I've tried to do it not from a point of necessarily forgiving, but from a point of, like you say, understanding. And that is to be aware that if the other person is like that, we've looked at it more from a point of gratitude that they're in their head and not in the other person's head. So we've tended to deal with it in our family that way, is to look at it, well, okay, that person's done that. It was really awful. It was not legal. It wasn't kind. It wasn't whatever. But we've also tried to say, well, they're like that because, but we've always looked at it, be grateful that we're on our side of it and not having to live in their mind. So for people who do find forgiveness very, very difficult, that's a good way to start that process, I think. It's just being grateful that you are in your mind, whatever you've had to experience, rather than being on the other side of that. And it is a difficult one to do. And I think the most powerful version of that I've ever heard of, this is a strange one to bring in, a gentleman named Chris Moon, I spoke to through work years ago. And he came in as a speaker to talk to all the engineers where I worked. And he'd worked in Cambodia, I think it was. I might be wrong. But he was the first white person to ever escape guerrilla capture. But then he'd gone into land clearing somewhere later on, landmine clearing. And he was in charge of a unit where they were going out and clearing routes, and somebody had ticked off that a route had been cleared. So they exited that end of that day via the route that was ticked off as having been cleared. But the person who'd cleared that route had actually just ticked the paperwork and gone off to the pub for the day. They'd driven off to the local town and not cleared the route. So as this guy, Chris, was leaving via this route, he stepped on a landmine and he lost a leg and an arm. And I think part something else. Anyway, he basically was so severely injured, there was nowhere to even place the drip. So he ended up putting the drip in his mouth and drinking it. and he was very, very severely burnt from it at the time and went through a very, very difficult recovery, but somehow he recovered. But when I saw him, he was already back to running marathons, even the ultra marathons, like 126 miles. And he was perfectly fit and healthy again, obviously minus limbs. But he said, when people ask him about how he feels about the guy that decided to go off down the pub that day, rather than doing the job and to tick that paperwork off, and how does he feel about them? He said, I would rather been the one that stepped on the landmine than the one that told a lie and had to live with the guilt for the rest of their life. And I thought that was very powerful, and so very much like you're saying, and he was there the same, very much in that mindset about he would rather have been in his thought process than whatever was going on in the other person's head. And it's like that form of gratitude, even though he was the one that lost limbs through it. And I thought that was a very, very powerful message. And it was great that he came and spoke to the guys at the wind farm about that when I was working there. So, but at the same time, that is, I think, part of healing. But I do get what you're saying as well with the healing, and it is an important part. Sorry, forgiveness. But I think forgiveness, you don't even have to meet the other person to forgive them. Forgiveness is about yourself, and it can sometimes take years to get there. And sometimes it can be something that you learn to do more quickly over time. But it is important for yourself to be able to forgive in some form for your own healing, because if not, you will always hold a grudge and you will always hold the pain of it. And it is very difficult. But at the same time, I still think it's very, from my point of view, and I know Rory and I have had conversations about this, it's very difficult to forgive somebody that you are still under the abuse of. If you are being abused by somebody, you do need to get away from it, and you need to stop the abuse, because you cannot forgive somebody and allow them to continue to abuse you, because that's enabling. And that is a whole different topic, is enabling versus stopping abuse. Abuse has to stop. But when it stopped, yes. Boundaries, barriers, massive topic. Like we said, we will go on for a long time and we still barely touched it. But if you've got any questions at all, or anything else that you want to talk about this, drop us a comment below. I haven't, so let me just quickly check. I haven't checked on the comments. I can't see any at the moment, so unless I'm not looking at it right. Oh, hang on. No, I can't see any comments at the moment, but thank you to anybody who's watched in today or watching on replay. Please let us know. Is there anything else you want to round up before we go, Rory? Sorry, I threw a lot at you there with the story about Chris. It's none of this is planned.
That's great. That's great. And it, again, all I will sum it up around is what I use for my own framework, which is recognize what's going on, recognize at the moment. Refreshing has to come back down to neutral. So even if it's a triggering thing in the moment, or if it's preempting something coming up, or if you're ruminating on something that's happened, we've got to recognize what we're feeling and become aware of it, and then to refresh it using mindfulness, going for a walk, calming down, doing something that feels relaxing, and then we can look at, once you're at a relaxed baseline, looking it back. If you look back or forwards and it's again, then it's going too far too quick. So it's a case of recognizing, refreshing, and being able to chip away, and that's where, yeah, the rehearsing and finally taking actions to refine that process to get to results. So just the way I like to remember it is battery charge. If we're feeling charged and we to come back down to baseline, and then get into possibility relaxation to be able to work out what to do or speak to someone that knows. So yeah.
Delegate. That's the other one. Sometimes we need to delegate. Let somebody else handle things for you. But again, it depends on the situation. If it's at work, somebody's overstepping boundaries. We have managers and leaders. Schools, go and speak with teachers, or if it's teenagers, go and speak with an adult. So that's the other one, is delegating and asking for help. Never be afraid to ask for help. But yeah, that mindfulness is absolutely, like you say, it's a great way for anything when you want to just stop reacting and come back to a point of taking positive action. But between reacting and like going to get into a point where you go, right. And it's just that moment of coming back to the self and learning to recenter. And yeah, I mean, that's why I actually create mindfulness books. So I have some online. Just find my website. And I never did introduce myself. I've got to update my title on here because it keeps wiping it off every time I come back. But yeah, so I am an emotional awareness expert, but I focus on mindfulness as well. And yes, I've used it for many, many years. Very, very powerful. But we will cover mindfulness as a separate topic as well, I think, as a whole. Lots to talk about that separately. But I've
Awesome.
enjoyed this chat today, Rory. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kay. Really
Right.
brilliant.
Great, great, great. So this is High Leverage Actions about finding your higher self. So thank you for listening to us talk about boundaries and barriers today. We'll be back at 6 p.m. next Monday with another live podcast. Till then, have an amazing week. Bye bye.
Bye.